Hi, today I thought I'd do an experiment. Recently I did a review of Adobe Premiere Clip, which is a video editing app for Android and iOS. And you can check it up at the link up here. That got me wondering though, what platform could do it better, iOS or Android? And on top of that, what was the speed difference between the highest end Android devices and the highest end Apple devices? So that's what we're doing today. Now here on the left I have the iPad Pro 10-inch, which is running iOS 10.3. Over here I have the Google Pixel XL, which is running Android version 7.1.1. And over here we have the Nvidia Shield Tablet K1, which is running Android 7.0. Now I'd like to include the iPhone 7, but unfortunately I don't have one of those. So we're going to have to make do with these. But I don't think anyone can argue right now, as of this date, that these are some of the highest end devices available. So how do the combatants stack up? Well, the iPad Pro 10-inch has the Apple A9X chip in it, which is a dual-core 2.16 GHz 64-bit CPU, a 12-core PowerVR Series 7 GPU, and it's rocking 2 GB of RAM. Meanwhile, the Pixel XL has the Qualcomm Snapdragon 821 chipset. That's a quad-core CPU, but it can only run 2 cores at a time because there are two 2.15 GHz cores and 2 low-powered 1.6 GHz cores that it changes back and forth depending on how much power is needed for the app. That is a 64-bit CPU. It has a Adreno 530 GPU and 4 GB of RAM. Lastly, but certainly not least, we have the Nvidia Shield K1, which has the Nvidia Tegra K1 chipset. That's a quad-core 2.2 GHz 32-bit CPU. It has the GeForce Kepler 192 CUDA cores GPU and 2 GB of RAM. So I thought it'd be fun to see which one could render video faster, since they all can run Adobe Premiere Clip. Now I put together on my Pixel XL 2 roughly 5-minute long videos, and then I edited them to add music and filters and change the exposure on things just to give it something to render out so that it's not just transcoding from one format to the other. It actually has to process it. And then after a lot of pain and suffering, I finally got it to sync from this using Adobe Creative Cloud to these other two devices. For whatever reason, if I made the video on here first, it would never ever sync onto these. So it was quite a pain. As you can find out in that other video I made, the syncing process doesn't work very well and I wouldn't trust it with anything I cared about. But I was able to get 2 videos here. The iPad can only run in landscape mode in Adobe Premiere, so that's why it's sideways like that. So just to show that there's nothing else going on, I just freshly rebooted those and opened up settings was all to show you what was going on in there, so we'll get rid of that. So we just have Adobe Clip. Same thing here. So they're all freshly booted up and just running the one app. And to keep track of the time for us, we have the Apple iPod 5th generation, which I don't think would stand a chance with these and may not even work at all. So I'm going to start off with this one. It's just some screenshots I did for another video that's coming. I was just doing a screen recording. So to perform this test, I'm going to render these out to their respective galleries. That way the network or Wi-Fi or anything like that isn't involved. Before we begin, write down who you're rooting for in the comments below, and at the end of the video we'll see how you did. Close enough. Now the 2 Android devices had the option to render out in 720p or 1080p. The iPad, I could find no option to change the quality, so I had to render out a different video beforehand and export it to my Mac so I could see what resolution it was. And it is rendering out at 1080 as well. So you can see it's really flying. When I first saw this, that's what made me stop and think maybe I wasn't rendering to the same thing, because it is kicking the butt of the Android devices. one thing while this finishes up here. I have noticed how much snappier the iPad is, especially compared to Android tablets I've had in the past. Okay, it's done at about 151 compared to Android tablets I've had in the past, and even this one over here. And it's partly to do with the hardware, definitely, but iOS, the fact that it runs on Objective-C and Swift, it makes such a huge difference to how everything performs. And that's why Apple's been able to get by with just 1 or 2 gigabytes of RAM for so long, because a lot of the processing is done in compiled time on the computer rather than doing like garbage collection stuff while the program is running in Java, which is what Android is based on. Another thing to note is that they're all running on their recommended power, and they all have a case behind them, so heat shouldn't be a huge problem for any of them. On my next test, I'll take the cases off and just lay them on the table just to remove all variables. So I'm just going to let these finish up, and then we'll come back and run the other video as well, and probably expecting the same results. I just wanted to run 2 videos to get an average for the difference in time between them all. And at 8:12, we have the Nvidia Shield done. Right now, the Pixel XL with its 2 cores is really struggling. I don't know if these are GPU accelerated encodes. If they were, I would think the Nvidia Shield would have done better with its 192 CUDA cores. And coming in third at 12:55 is the Pixel XL. On to round 2. This is another set of footage that I filmed for another video that hopefully will be up soon. So, while I think the order is definitely still going to be the same, I'm curious how each device is going to do against itself, because this video is a lot more complex with a lot more changes between the pixels. So let's go ahead and get started. I'll save you having to watch another video render out and cut to the chase. As you can see, the iPad won again, but the Nvidia Shield did not finish. Now that's maybe not Nvidia's fault, because technically if you tried to download Adobe Premiere Clip on the Nvidia Shield, it says the device is not supported. I had to sideload it in order to get it to work, so we're just going to throw out those results. Both of these videos ended up being 5 minutes and 3 seconds long. And if we take the average time between the 2 runs, we get 2:03 for the iPad Pro, 13:09 for the Pixel XL, and then we're just going to go with the first time for the Nvidia K1 tablet, with the time of 8 minutes and 12 seconds. Now the iPad had more going for it than just rendering out the video faster. I pulled the videos into my computer to have a look at the files, and first thing I noticed was that the iOS rendered out in a .mov file, which is Apple's proprietary format. Meanwhile, the Android rendered out in a .mp4 file. If we pull up the properties for these, we can see that the iOS did it in 205 megabytes, meanwhile the Android took 293 megabytes, which is significantly bigger. Continuing on, if we go into the details here, one weird anomaly was that the iOS made the file length 5 minutes and 28 seconds, where the Android did the 503, which was the time length that I actually put in for the video. You can also see here that the data rate on the iOS is smaller at 5.1 megabits per second. Meanwhile, the Android was around 7.9 megabits per second. And it pumped it out at an even 30 frames per second, while this is probably at the 29.97 frames per second. And going on to the audio codecs, the Android did just a little bit larger, not much, but 48 kilohertz, while this was 44 kilohertz. If we pull up media info, for those of you who like codecs and stuff, I'll hold this on the screen for a moment here. I don't know a lot about codecs. I know enough to kind of get around with them, but if any of this means anything to you, you might find it interesting. If you want to look longer, go ahead and hit that pause button. Now let's take a look at the actual videos themselves. I grabbed some screenshots directly from the video so we can compare the quality between the two. This first one we're looking at is the Pixel XL version. You can see on the mask and in the shadowy parts how many compression artifacts there are. If we jump over to the iPad version, it looks much smoother. Another thing to note is the FlareCorp Media logo that I set to be a watermark on there appeared on the Pixel as it was supposed to be, but for some reason it didn't get added into the iPad version. If we take a look at this next clip, the compression artifacts are much more noticeable. You can see them across the entire image. Whereas compared to the iPad, it looks like a much higher quality video. Going back to the Pixel image here, this is the type of artifacting I was seeing when I did my Adobe Premiere Clip review, and I said that it wasn't high enough quality that I would feel comfortable sharing anything with. But the iPad version looks much nicer. And finishing it off by looking at a short video clip here, we'll go ahead and look at the Pixel XL, and if you focus on the fire, you'll see all those artifacts getting flicked around. And then we will jump over to the iPad version. And then we'll jump back and forth real fast. And you can see just how much smoother and nicer the iPad version is. So, there you have it. There wasn't really a point to this video. I was just kind of curious how the same app would perform on different devices. Let me know if you like this format, just testing things out. Let me know if the results surprised you. They kind of surprised me. I know how well iOS performs, but the Nvidia Shield tablet is a really strong device, so I thought it could go either way. The cool thing to take away from this is that the iOS version of Adobe Premiere Clip produces some really high quality videos, and that's great because now I know I can edit on the run if I really need to. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, I understand. It was just something new to try out. But please check out one of our other videos over here. And when you're done with that, please subscribe because the subscribes really help me a lot. That's all for today. Thanks a ton for watching.